Good evening, everyone, and welcome from Cape Town in South Africa. I'm Brigitte Limbanda, your host, and with me today is Dr. Anthony Turton, who needs absolutely no introduction. Dr. Turton is a world-renowned environmental advisor and scientist, and today we are talking about the VAAL crisis in particular. So welcome all our live viewers, and also welcome to those watching the show on the replay. So the Mfuleni is on the VAAL River, and it's home to the Rand water that takes feedstock from the river now, and it's overwhelmed by raw sewage. And there currently is a call to action on this. And so welcome to the show, Anthony.
Good evening to you and the listeners. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So your recent statement with regards to the call for action, you said in part the Mfuleni is the epicenter of state failure. The most basic of that infrastructure is water reticulation into the area and the processing of waste out of the area. Can you break that down a little bit, and what does that mean in real terms for us?
Okay, if you understand anything about the geography of South Africa, you'll know that the what used to be known as the VAAL Triangle was the epicenter of heavy primary production in South Africa. By primary production, I mean there was, for example, the old ISCOR works where South Africa made its own iron and steel. There was the Sasol works where coal was made into oil to beat sanctions during the years of isolation. There are some other specialized manufacturing processes there, heavy engineering, rolling of steel, processing of specialized steel, etc., etc. There's even a cable manufacturing company there, etc., etc. So the bottom line is that the Mfuleni, what is now called Mfuleni area, the old VAAL Triangle area, is really the concentration of heavy industrial primary capacity on the entire African continent. I'm not aware of any other part of Africa that has got such a concentration of primary production from an engineering or manufacturing perspective. So that's the background. It happens to be on a flat floodplain. It's a floodplain on the VAAL River. The VAAL River is called the VAAL River because it's got fine sediment in it. Foul means dirty or basically refers to this fine sediment in it. So Rand Water is the company, the public utility that was created immediately after the Anglo-Boer War, and it was tasked with the responsibility of getting water out of the VAAL River and into the gold mining area, the Witwatersrand goldfields. It has now become, and I stand under correction, but I believe it's the largest, if not the largest, one of the largest single bulk water suppliers anywhere in the world. In other words, nowhere in America, nowhere in Europe is there a single bulk water supplier of the same scale and magnitude as Rand Water. So it's a world-class entity, and its task is to provide the drinking water and the industrial process water into this heavy primary production area. And there's also another strange structural factor that we need to understand when talking about the Mfuleni area. Because gold is found on the continental watershed divide, it's not on a river, it's not on a lake, it's not on a waterfront. I've said this many times before. Because of that, you have to pump vast quantities of water uphill. And as you pump vast quantities of water uphill, firstly, energy is used in significant quantities. But more importantly, it means that your drinking water is downstream of your sewage works in all cases. So the primary responsibility of your water authorities is twofold. Firstly, they have to secure the bulk water supply from the river. They then have to process that to potable and industrial standards and pump it uphill into these municipalities that now control the economy. Then the second function, which is not necessarily in the same legal entity, but the second broad function of the state is to take the wastewater coming out of that area, either industrial grade waste or mining waste or human waste, sewage waste, all liquid waste has to be processed in a series of wastewater treatment works. And now it gets interesting, because Rand Water, as a bulk water supplier, is a state-owned entity, and to the best of my knowledge, it answers to the Department of Water and Sanitation, although it was originally created by the mining companies. The various directors of mining companies sat on the board originally many, many years ago. I believe that's changed now. However, having said that, because it's a state-owned entity, we open that can of worms in a moment. But because it's a state-owned entity, it is responsible to national level. But your wastewater works are responsible to municipal level. So you got two different levels of government at work here. And this is where it gets to be quite interesting, because it is in the municipal sphere of government, or tier of government, that we're having most of the problems in South Africa. And Mfuleni is a dysfunctional, 100% dysfunctional municipality. When I say 100% dysfunctional, all services run by Mfuleni have ground to a halt. The entity has been placed under what you would call sequestration, or under judicial management, if you like. That's not the right word, but it's placed under special management rule that has removed the executive authority of the municipal officials. They're no longer in charge of it. It's now the provincial legislature and national that is responsible for managing the affairs, because they're effectively so bankrupt that they are unable to do anything. They think of it as being in a state of liquidation. So that's the situation we have now. Now, with that as a background, I've been part of a team that has been briefed by the military. I was called out a while ago. Late last year, the military reached out to me, SANDF, and they started putting together a team of specialists. And they asked me if I would be interested, and I said yes, I'm more than willing to serve on that team if you want me. And we went there for a formal about a month ago. And in that briefing, I was shocked at what I saw, because here they showed us the number of water sewage works. There are 3 major water sewage works in the area, but because the area is so flat, you cannot have a gravity-fed sewage system feeding sewage over long distances in that particular terrain. So you have to have a series of pump stations. And the information that I have is that there are over 40 pump stations that have ceased to function. And when I say ceased to function, these pumps have ground to a halt on physical material that should never be put down the sewer in the first place. We're talking about condoms. I've never seen such a large number of condoms in my life, but vast quantities of condoms, vast quantities of baby nappies, vast quantities of wet wipes, vast quantities of plastic bottles. These pipes are completely plugged up from one end to the other, hundreds of kilometers of pipe. And in fact, I've heard subsequently that it's over 1,000 kilometers of pipe that is completely blocked up. In some places, the pipes have collapsed, have completely collapsed. So the question is, can you mine those pipes out? Can you physically put a machine in there to clean those pipes out? Yes or no? I don't know. Or do you have to dig the pipes out the ground and relay the pipes? Both of these endeavors are very sophisticated, complex endeavors. Both of them require a level of expertise that the municipality doesn't have. It is under judicial management, for want of a better word. It is unable to manage its own affairs, so it can't do it. So the question is, who's going to fix it up? The military was mobilized to do that task. The military doesn't have the technical capacity. They're soldiers. Their job is not to fix broken sewage pumps. And what happens when the sewage pump seize up? The pump station floods with raw sewage. And you now get this pump station that's flooded and unable to pump. You're unable to get in there because it's now underwater. It's got raw, untreated sewage that now flows out of the pump station to the surface, and it finds its way through the streets to the triangle. Got to go anyway. Just take a random drive around there, and on every single street corner that you come to, you will find the nearest manhole is overflowing, and it's overflowing constantly, in some cases through a shopping center, in some cases through people's houses. There's simply overflowing sewage everywhere. But when I say that it's failed, when I say it's failed, it's not only sewage that has not been collected, it's the solid waste that's not being collected. So there are piles of garbage that are 1.5 meters high, all over the city, all over the industrial heartland of the continent. Piles of garbage, waist height, sometimes shoulder height. These piles of garbage are being fed every day by people because the garbage is not being collected, has not been collected for a considerable period of time. So there's fresh food that's been thrown there. So it's seething with maggots. There are flies. There are rats that have got the arrogance of a gangster. So these arrogant rats walk around, they look you in the eye, they're not afraid of a human being, and they carry on. So this is the state of play we have in what used to be the industrial heartland. So I fail to see that this is anything but a totally failed state endeavor. I cannot see anything functional out of that place. The roads are filled with potholes. There's no functional decision making. The budget is not managed and has been mismanaged. There's widespread nepotism, widespread corruption. There's a number of court cases coming to the fore now where vast quantities, we're talking about tens of millions of rand have been paid for services that have never been received, invoices that have been given without work having ever been done. So we're talking about the highest level of corruption you can imagine. That's what the Mfuleni situation is like now. I cannot underemphasize how serious that situation is. So it's against that background that because I've been interested in studying state failure and how state failure happens. How does a state fail? What happens? Is there one big bang? Does something fall down? Or is there lots of little dominoes? Do the dominoes fall down? Do some stand up and some fall down? How does this actually work? And it turns out that in the case of South Africa, it's your municipal level. About at least 40% of our municipalities are in this level of dysfunction. Some people refer to maybe up to as many as 60% of our municipalities are distressed. And because our wastewater in all cases is managed by municipalities, the first thing that goes when your municipality is distressed is your wastewater treatment function. That's the first thing that happens. So in my view, understanding state failure now, the first domino to fall is your sewage work stops working. And once your sewage work stops working, now you don't have the expertise, you don't even have the technical ability to recognize that there's a problem, and you lack the ability to say, we now have to do something about this. And then you go into budgetary constraints and the limitations posed by the Public Financial Management Act, where you now have to do certain things in terms of tendering, and you can't tender for this, but you can tender for that, and there's this time period for that, and this tender can only be open for that period of time, and that system now is unable to respond adequately to the seriousness of the situation on hand. And it is in that context that private citizens now start taking control, and in this case there's a thing called IRPA, the Mfuleni Ratepayers Association. They have decided to create an entity to take control of the situation. And they have now put out a call to the presidency, to the president himself, to recognize the crisis and to declare a state of emergency or to declare a disaster in that area. So what you referred to at the start of the conversation was my response to the IRPA's call for the president to declare a state of emergency. So yeah, it's a long answer for a very, very short question, but the listeners need to understand the complexity and the depth and breadth of this problem that we're dealing with in Mfuleni.
Anthony, thanks for that explanation. It surely paints a very grim picture for us. Now, if the sewage system is failing to the extent that you are saying, is that complete total failure? And if we're on our way to total failure, what will be the next result of the domino if the system completely packs up? Because now you've already said that there doesn't seem to be, we don't have the competency to fix this. The army doesn't have the competency. So if the system completely fails, which it seems like it's on that collision course, what next?
You see, I would decide, it depends how you define system failure. So I would say, just to work on some sort of technical definition of failure, I would say that the primary responsibility of any government is to deliver services to its people, and this is based on a contract, and that's called a social contract. And the social contract, the literature is filled with this stuff, okay? But the social contract is quite simple. I, the Joe citizen, recognize the state, and I recognize that the state has the authority to levy taxes from me. So I'm responsible as a citizen to pay taxes to the state. But the state is now responsible and in fact is legally bound in terms of the social contract to provide primary services to me. So the primary service is security, a service, for example, postal services. The roads must work, transport, healthcare, water supply, sanitation, electricity. These are basic services that the state must provide, and the foundation of your social contract is that I recognize the state as having that responsibility. Therefore, I give the state the authority to levy taxes, and I undertake to pay those taxes. So once those services are no longer being provided, the state ceases to exist in a de facto sense of the word. So the raison d'etre of that state is no longer there. But now the state is still levying taxes, but it's not delivering services. So in the meantime, now if we look at the domino effect, what happens next now? So the first thing that happens is that capital is driven out of that area. Why would anybody invest into an area where there is no primary services being provided on a reliable basis? So where the roads are so broken that you can't get a vehicle, where your electricity power station, there are substations in Mfuleni, almost every week there's another substation that burns. Almost, if you watch just how often that is, big 88,000 volt, 88 kV substations blowing up on a regular basis in spectacular balls of fire. Why is that happening? Is that sabotage? Is it negligence? Is it just a failure to do basic maintenance? Without electricity, in this place that I've described to you now as the epicenter of heavy engineering in Africa, these people make petrol. These people make steel. These people make copper cables. These people make things that become other things. If they haven't got electricity to turn their mills, to turn their machines, for people to clock into work in the morning, how can that economy function? It cannot function. It cannot function. So the bottom line is that your state failure happens when your local authority is unable to deliver these key basic services. Now, when that starts happening, your economy starts tanking. People start disinvesting. One need only look at the property prices in the Mfuleni right now. I urge you to get a property expert on your show to start talking about property values. You find a situation where people are unable to sell their property because which person in their right mind is now going to go and buy a beautiful house overlooking what used to be a beautiful river in a prime piece of real estate where you've got raw sewage flowing down the river and you've got raw sewage flowing through your house maybe, or certainly in your backyard. What are you going to do about it? So you have a situation now where it's quite conceivable that people have bonds on their houses, bonds on their properties, where the value of the bond exceeds the real value of the land. So you're now starting to get into a situation where you've got severe economic collapse, absolute economic collapse in the area. So I'm a very simple person. When I drive through there, I just look at the number of cars in the parking lot of the factory on a Saturday afternoon. Are there cars in the parking lot on a Saturday afternoon? Yes or no? And lately, you see there are no cars in the parking lot. Why? Because of unemployment. People have been laid off work. 10 years ago, you could drive there, and that parking lot was full of people working overtime because the economy was going. So, but these are the basic indicators. So this is what happens when your state fails. But now you start getting another element coming in, and this is what concerns me very, very deeply about the Mfuleni crisis now. Because we have a situation of state capture in South Africa. And with that situation of state capture, it's all about revenues in the state that are now being hijacked and are being pushed over to other entities. So it's about control over the resources. So let me just expand on this a little bit, because it's important once again that the listener must understand what I'm saying. I do a lot of work for advising investors, high net worth individuals. And a short while ago, I had the privilege of having lunch with the CEO of a major bank. And we were having lunch, and we were just talking about things in general. And I told him that I like simple factual things that I can understand. If you do this, then that happens. That's what I like in my life. I said to him that the politics of South Africa right now are quite simple. We've got 55 million people, 55 million citizens plus minus. We've got 5 million plus minus taxpayers, and we've got less than 1 million card-carrying cadres. So the politics are about less than 1 million people gaining access to the revenues from the 5 million at the expense of the 55. So I said to him, that's what I understand the politics of South Africa to be. Less than 1 million people capturing the resources, the resource flows from the 5 million taxpayers at the expense of the 55. And he said to me, he thinks I'm not right. So I said, what do you mean I'm not entirely right? He said, the mistake in my thesis is that they're not 5 million taxpayers. He said, while there might be a large number of people that pay VAT, the burden of tax, he gave me a number which shocked me. He said that something like 80% of your tax, other than VAT, other than the general tax that everybody pays, something like 80% of the tax burden falls onto 100,000 people. So the pool of people that are paying the burden of taxes, the large burden of taxes, simply means that this is unsustainable. It's simply unsustainable. So now we get back to the ERPA thing. We get back now to the state capture thing. Are we as citizens going to allow this to happen? Are we as citizens going to draw a line in the sand and say, up to here, no further? Are we, what can a reasonable citizen do? What can we actually do about this? Should we just be alarmed and angry, or should we actually apply our minds and try and do something constructive about this? So that's where we are. What concerns me the most now is that with the state capture mindset that we have, we now have a situation where R1 billion is being allocated. 1 billion, people talk here in big numbers, 1 billion rand is being allocated to entities to fix the VAAL River, but none of those entities have the core skills to fix the VAAL River. So let's unpack who those two entities are. One entity is the SANDF, that's talking of a budget in the order of 700 to 800 million rand. And for that budget, what are they doing? They're buying some big trucks and heavy machinery, none of which are actually designed to fix up broken sewage works. But they on a capital acquisition expedition. But more importantly, they are employing unemployed people to guard pump stations. So they're creating jobs for unemployed people, because that's an important thing to do as well. Okay? Then where's the technical expertise coming from? The technical expertise is coming from, allegedly, a company called ADVA, East Rand Water Care Company. But East Rand Water Care Company is a wholly owned company, a water services company in Ekurhuleni. What does Ekurhuleni? How can Ekurhuleni have its water company now going to provide services in another municipality when that same ADVA, the same East Rand Water Company, it's a known fact, is a major polluter on the Henops River and has been since Kader Asmal was Minister of Water. I used to speak to Kader Asmal when he was minister, and he was angry about ADVA, East Rand Water, polluting the Henops River. And if you speak to the people today that are trying to fix up the Hellops River, your persistent source of pollution comes from Israel Water Care Company. So now the company that is unable to get its own act together in its own backyard is now charging 340 million rand of taxpayers' money just to become an advisor, just to tell people what should be done, but not actually doing it. So between the SANDF and ADWAT, you've got over R1 billion being allocated, 1 billion rand being allocated, and there's not a snowball's hope in hell that effort will eventually fix up the seized up pumps that I'm talking about, will mine the one over 1,000 kilometers of blocked up sewer that I'm talking about. It's not physically possible. It's not going to happen. Now, let's look at the other side of that same coin. Here you have a private sector that's on its knees. The private sector has consulting engineers that work there. Those consulting engineers, highly competent, highly capable people, they have been starved. They've been brought to their knees. You look at any consulting engineering company today. There was a recent announcement made by Murray and Roberts Group 5. They're laying off significant portions of their staff because they're not getting revenues from the state for engineering jobs. So now this is that state capture at another level. So instead of putting that R1 billion into the private sector, where you can hold people accountable, where you can actually you can expect to find the technical capacity to fix the pumps up and to actually relay a pipe if you have to. But that's not happening. And because that's not happening now, those companies are failing. Because those companies are failing, we're losing our technical capacity as a nation. But because those companies are failing, they're laying off technically competent people. So they are entering the unemployment queue. But because of that, they're not paying taxes because their profits are so down. Therefore, the government is not getting taxes, so it cannot pay. So you've got this vicious spiral now, and this is where that state failure thing starts really happening in an aggressive way. So I think it's very important that we, as a nation of people, of sensible people, that we come together now and we start understanding exactly what's going on, and we've got to start calling it like it is. We've got to start calling a spade a spade. You know me, I call a spade, okay? Now, tonight I've told you the way I see it, okay? And people are welcome to disagree with me, but that's the way that I see it, because that's, to me, is the most honest assessment that I'm capable of making. So this is where we are now. We have a situation where there are two initiatives playing out now. The one initiative is the what I would call the final phase of capture, where this R1 billion is now being channeled through these different the SANDF and the and Israel Water ADWAT. And what I haven't mentioned is that in the mix now, the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Gugile Nkwinti, has announced the creation of a state-owned company, a state-owned water engineering company, or a state-owned construction company. Well, now, this is evidently based in Potchefstroom. Now, from what I can gather, it is a place where ex-MK veterans are being employed. And from what I can gather, they don't have the technical core skills needed to do what I've spoken about mining these pipes out and fixing up the pipes in Mfuleni. But they are getting the contracts. They are getting the work. So it's all good and well for the developmental state to say we're going to employ unemployed people. Wonderful. I've got no problem with that. But while we're doing that, the rest is falling down, and then ultimately we're going to get into an irreversible situation. So we have to call it the way we see it now. And I mentioned the two games that are being played now. The first game is this state capture thing with a state-owned construction company now, where tenders are not they're not called for, where contracts are just given, where money goes, R1 billion just goes from the fiscus to these entities that don't have the technical capacity. And then on the other hand, you have this presidential initiative where the private sector is working with the presidency to try and develop a framework that can enable 5% economic growth to happen, so that we can employ people, so that we can kickstart the economy, that we can get revenues back into the fiscus, we can levy taxes, etc. So these two things are playing out, and they are mutually exclusive. You can't have both. It's either one or the other. So in many ways, I almost see this as a kind of end game. It's the end game of state capture. If the state capture is allowed to continue, as I've explained now, and this R1 billion gets hijacked, siphoned off to this construction company, and Eastern Water gets all the work but doesn't do it. If that happens, then I'm afraid we're not going to fix up the Mfuleni crisis, and therefore what is happening in Mfuleni now is going to start cascading upstream to Gauteng, the people that drink water in Gauteng, because unfortunately, I mentioned it at the start of this interview, Rand Water is the biggest single bulk water provider in the world. Secret between you and me, please don't tell anyone about the secret. It's only us that knows about the secret. They were never engineered to take sewage contaminated water and make it potable. They were designed from the beginning to take water with mud in it, VAAL rivier, fine suspended sediment, fine mud. They do that exceptionally well, but they were never ever designed to take sewage, raw sewage, and make that potable water. They were never designed for that. So the only way, I mean, they can technically do it if they re-engineer their processes, but that's going to cost a huge amount of money. So we need to once again open that can of worms that we can speak honestly to each other about. So this is where we are today. This is what's at stake in the background of this Mfuleni call. That's why I think it's so important that we want to get people, ordinary people, mobilized to support this initiative. We want to stand behind the ERPA, Mfuleni Ratepayers Association, and we want that call of theirs to the presidency to declare an emergency. We want that to happen for them, because once the emergency has been declared, now you can start your procurement processes other than going through the normal long-winded tender processes, and then it gets this, and then it gets that, and then this person's brought in, and that doesn't happen. So we've got to short track all of those things. This is too important an issue right now to fail.
Thank you for putting that in a nutshell and giving us clear indication. I think none of us are left in any kind of doubt as to the amount of trouble the Mfuleni municipality is in. We're back in a bit. So, Anthony, tell us, why does this affect us as a country as a whole, and why should every citizen in South Africa want to support the call for a national emergency? Why is it not a localized? Why should it not just be a localized disaster?
Okay, I think it's important that everybody should be part of this process, because Rand Water, the scale and magnitude of that operation is such that it provides water to 45% of the population of the country and about 65% of the national economy. So these are two large segments of important things in our economy, the people and the economy. It's the only entity of that scale. So all the other ones, your Umgeni waters and your Mhlatu's waters, etc., they pale into insignificance compared to Rand Water. The second thing is, because your sewage systems are failing in Mfuleni, or have failed in Mfuleni, the situation is now that it's not impossible to start seeing the deterioration of water quality, or simply an overwhelming of your bulk water supply systems. They're simply overwhelmed by what it is that comes into them. So we haven't seen that yet. Thank goodness. Rand Water's still done a pretty good job at that, and we must be very thankful, and we must support them. But we mustn't get sidetracked from that issue, that this can happen very quickly. And it's interesting that Rand Water has kind of gone to ground. They don't talk publicly anymore. It's also interesting that, for example, we're not getting green drop and blue drop reports anymore. We haven't had for some years now. And that opens up another conversation about why we need a water regulator. Let's not get sidetracked on that issue now. The important thing is that, why is this important nationally? The other thing is that if your big municipalities are unable to cope, what about the smaller municipalities? So as we're sitting here now, there are parts of Vryheid, Dundee, KZN that have got the same the same situation. Parts of the North Coast, they've got exactly the same situation. Parts of the Free State, they've got exactly the same situation. So what's happening in Mfuleni is really a microcosm of what's happening in the country. Now for the good news. Now we need some good news. It's time that we had a bit of a breakdown. Good news. The good news is that with this public-private growth initiative, this PPGI initiative that we're busy with, we've managed to convince the key decision makers that you cannot talk about economic recovery and revival in South Africa unless you really take water seriously. Water is an ultimate economic enabler, and the absence of water is a disabler. So that's what we've said. We managed to convince those decision makers at the moment. So the water sector is now part of the PPGI. Let's hope we can cling on to that and keep it like that. But now, once we do that, what we want to do is we want to attract 1 trillion rand into the water sector, 1 trillion rand of private capital, because the fiscus won't provide it, because the taxpayer can't pay any more money. So they maxed out, okay? So we want to get 1 trillion rand into the water sector to go back to the consulting engineering companies to basically create jobs to fix what is broken. We've got 824 sewage works in the country. About 60% of those are dysfunctional in some form or other. So what we're looking at is the creation of what we call a cookie cutter solution. And that cookie cutter solution solves a fundamental problem in the water sector at the moment. And that problem is that even if you are selected as a private sector operator, you cannot legally contract with a municipality that is bankrupt. They are unbankable. They are uninvestable. You cannot enter into a contract with that entity because the risk is just too high. So a team of very smart people have now figured out a way around this thing. And what they've developed is a thing called SPV, Special Purpose Vehicles. And an SPV is a legal entity that has been created, and there are a number of SPVs for different purposes. And that SPV, think of that thing there, that's an SPV there now. It's a ring-fenced entity. The contract is between the private sector and the municipality through that SPV. The money that goes into that cannot be stolen, cannot be taken out for fees or for payments or anything of that nature. So it's corruption-free. That's why it's not very popular, because it's such a robust entity. What we're hoping to do is, with the SPVs, we're hoping to find a couple of critical, nationally significant sewage works. One of them would be Mfuleni. They want a Sebokeng, 120 megalitre a day plant, 120 million litres a day of raw sewage going into the VAAL River, because that single plant is broken. Now, this is where it comes into conflict now with that billion rand that's being hived off. That billion rand is going to Eastern Water and to the SANDF to allegedly fix that up. But if that happens, then you can't bring this SPV in, because the SPV then will be unable to raise the capital that you need. When you're talking about an SPV, what makes that thing bankable is an offtake agreement. So there's an agreement between the contracting parties and an entity that needs that water. And that agreement is a 30-year contract, and that's what makes this thing financially viable. So in the context of the Sebokeng works, there is an offtake agreement with industrial users. It's there for the required period of time. So that particular SPV can fly. It is bankable as we sit here now. But we've got to overcome this corruption story. We've got to overcome those stumbling blocks. But that's where we are. If we can solve it in Mfuleni, which is it's an entirely soluble problem, if we can solve it there, then we can start rolling it out to other parts of the country in this cookie cutter, rapid rollout kind of model. And that's where we're working with the presidency on that idea, to try and establish the legal framework and try and get these SPVs bedded down so that they now become bankable in their own right, then start populating those SPVs with service providers, engineers, construction people, suppliers, whatever has to go into that SPV to fix that thing up, and then get the contracts going and get that sorted out. So this is where we are, and that in fact is a good news story, because if we get that right, we can hopefully attract 1 trillion rand into the economy. 1 trillion rand with a multiplier of at least 3, so that's 3 trillion rand that's going to ultimately flow through the economy in terms of that money being recirculated back to other suppliers, etc. It's not a trivial amount of money. And it just sort of slips off my tongue as such a big amount of money. It's not a trivial sum of money at all. And if we get that right, and we can get that right, then we're actually talking about a very, very happy outcome, because we can now start moving to that recycling economy where we recover, we reuse water, we desalinate water where appropriate. We basically apply the correct technology for the correct problem in the correct setting at the correct price. And, and all of that is technically possible as we sit here now, if we can just overcome these bottlenecks or these constraints.
Wow, thank you so much. I think, you've left us in no doubt with what the crisis exactly is, why we should all get involved, and also what the outlook is and possible solutions. So thank you very much for that. And I want to remind everyone that in the description of this broadcast, the link is available there for you. I think currently there's probably, about 1,600 people have signed the petition. And the goal right now is to get to 2,000 first, and obviously from there to grow. But I think you've outlined very well why this is such an important matter and why it needs to be declared a national disaster. Before we end, any closing words, Anthony?
Yes, okay. I just want to say one or two things if I can, please. So firstly, I'm thrilled that that's the number, because I haven't checked up. I know that ERPA was aiming at 200 signatures. So if we've exceeded 1,000, that's wonderful. Let's get to 2,000. Let's get to 10,000. Let's make this serious. But the other thing that's important is that while ERPA is doing a very good job in Mfuleni, but their hands are tied behind their back, there's exactly the same thing happening on the Henops River. An excellent amount of work being done. An entity called Save the Henops River. They're doing amazing work, but they've been stonewalled by Eastern Water Advert that is not fixing up their leaks upstream. Okay, so we need to link those things together. But there are also other initiatives in other parts of the country. And my closing statement is, what we need to do now is stop being partisan about this. This is not a black-white issue. This is not an ANC-DA issue. This is an issue that should be able to unite all South Africans. We are all equally affected. It's an equal opportunity problem, this thing, okay? So my view is that we need to start harnessing the anger and the rage of people out there. And we need to start channeling that into what I'm calling an unstoppable movement of positive change. And I just want to say one or two things about that, because each of these things are subcategories of that big movement for positive change. Because the problem in the water sector is the same problem in the energy sector. It's the same problem for potholes in roads. It's all about broken governance and lack of oversight and lack of accountability and responsibility. So if we get that right, we can start having that domino effect the other way. Instead of state failure, we can now start rebuilding the state. And we're all citizens of the state. We all have a vested interest in that. So I'm going to say one more thing about this unstoppable movement of positive change. The lessons that we've learned from the struggle in South Africa, the historic struggle, the armed struggle, was that when the state became oppressive in the 1970s and 80s, they oppressed the activists that were rising up against the then apartheid state. An interesting thing happened. An entity that was decentralized came to the fore. And in that decentralized, it's called the UDF, United Democratic Front, a united democratic front of entities, each in their own right, all working to a common objective, but each individual, each funding their own thing, each doing their own thing. And what was significant about that was if and when the state came back to retaliate, they could cut the head off one individual or one entity, but they could not destroy the whole entity. So this unstoppable movement for positive change, we need to create this thing as a positive thing. It must be aspirational. It must be capable of reaching across all color divides, all class divides, all socioeconomic status divides. It must be a single issue where the South African public say, we, the people of South Africa, believe in the constitution of this country, and our primary expectation is that we will be given good, healthy water and sanitation services that won't make us sick, and that are befitting a democracy where people can go to the toilet in dignity. So that's what we've got to do. To that end, I'm working with a different team of people, and hopefully we're going to talk to you in the very near future about rolling this thing out, because what we've done is we've created a kind of branding opportunity, if you like, where we can start branding this thing and inviting the ARPAs. We can start inviting the people that are working in the Cape Town area, or the people that are working in Port Elizabeth, whatever, the Hennepersriver people. They can all become part and parcel of this unstoppable movement of positive change. And each of them can have their own local initiative, link it up to that bigger issue. So we hope in the very near future be doing that. We're talking to some branding specialists now, and people that understand how to strategize in that space. So that's kind of, hopefully this a vision of a better future, a happier vision, where we can all have the right to just be happy.
That is an awesome note to end our broadcast on this evening. Anthony, a huge, big thank you for your honesty and your policy of always just sharing nothing but the truth. And I hope that you have all taken this to heart, and that you will look at the comments on the stream, and that you will, with all seriousness, consider to pledge your support for this cause. So thank you for watching, everyone, and have a good evening further. From me, Bridget Mbanda, it's goodbye for now. And thank you so much again, Anthony.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.